Hey, college football fans, we got a quick update for you. First, we want to talk about Washington State and the Pac-12. Then we're going to get into the SEC commissioner and some comments he's made. And thirdly, we have some viewer comments specifically about the college football playoffs.
College football is back, and we're back on the Big Mountain, where we bring you a fresh take on the Big Ten and the Mountain West.
Yeah, it's great to have you again. Hey, we want to get a quick update for you. Got a couple things we want to talk about here in terms of conference realignment and expansion. We're going to start out here with Steve. He has some updates from Washington State University and the Pac-12. So what do you got here, Steve?
Yeah, so there hasn't been any new developments in the court case, so we've been following closely. However, I did want to bring to our viewers, I want to make sure they're aware, Washington State's AD, Pat Chun, did travel and address the NCAA Division I Council that met this last week. They meet yearly, at least yearly, quarterly, to basically just talk about large overarching governance issues for Division I sports that are under the NCAA's jurisdiction. The main part of his presentation to the D1 Council was he wanted to basically get some compassion and understanding and flexibility from them in regards to what's happening with the Pac-12 and with Washington State and Oregon State specifically. There are different rules. We've talked about this before with how many teams do you have to have for a conference. There's all kinds of other rules, who can have a championship game. And these are all determined by the D1 Council. So to me, the reason I thought this was an important update, I mean, he's just asking basically for kind of like, some sympathy and some leeway as they figure out how they're going to operate this year as a conference and then possibly over the next 2 years. So this leads me to believe, and what we've talked about, is that I really think this is just another block in the wall of evidence that Washington State and Oregon State are going to try and keep, for the next 2 years at least, keep the PAC as an entity, keep running, even if it's just two teams, until they figure out what they're going to do. Are they going to bring other teams in? Are they going to merge with the Mountain West? Are they going to leave and go to the Mountain West? So this is just another block of evidence that really points to them trying to keep the PAC alive for 2 more years, which I think is smart. We talked about some of the revenue issues, and it gives them kind of a window and a cushion. And they're basically just asking the NCAA, like, hey, this is extraordinary circumstances. We had a 100-year-old conference that just went poof in a matter of months, weeks, days. And just give us a break for a little bit while we would deal with this. We figure it out. We know there's these specific rules, but NCAA, do you really need to come in and enforce these rules on two teams that have already been kicked down, kicked to the curb kind of? And so I think it was a good move by them. The NCAA has said they want to change how they operate. They don't want to just be that heavy arm of the law. So I think this was a good move to kind of buy them some time specifically. So again, not a huge update, no changes in the court case, but I did think this was significant because it really points to what they want to do in the next 2 years.
Well, and I think that's great. And I would say even just looking at next year, let's not look at 2 years, let's look at next year. And the last Pac-12 update we did, we talked about when the hearing's set for, which is November 14th. And the episode before that, we talked about, what has kind of come out of Washington State and Oregon State. They did a media call several weeks ago and some questions about scheduling for next year. And they mentioned, late fall. Well, late fall for scheduling and a November 14th beginning preliminary hearing does not set up for them doing much of anything, I think, in terms of switching conferences. This, again, is just another piece of that puzzle that very much leads me to believe at this point, I'm going to just say for at least 1 year, I don't know about 2, but definitely for next year, I think all signs are pointing that the Pac-2 will still be alive and well. You'll have Washington State and Oregon State being in the PAC. They will absolutely, we're going to get into football playoffs here. And so I don't want to, get into that too much. I know there's questions and some things we're going to get into, but I think one of them will get in the playoffs and you're going to have all that revenue, and they have every right to that revenue under the existing bylaws and everything else. I think it gives them time to figure things out in terms of a merger, in terms of where do they really need to go. All facts for me are pointing to Oregon State, Washington State being in the Pac-12, Pac-2, whatever you want to call it, for at least 1 year, maybe 2, but definitely at least for next year, because they've got to get a schedule out. They have to know what they're doing. They're not going to have any answers on this litigation stuff that they're going to want to have in order to make educated decisions on how they can move forward. So, to me, all signs are pointing to a Pac-2 next year.
Totally agree, and it's going to be, they already have, it's a difficult situation to be in. Mm-hmm. There's all those concerns. You just did a great rundown of all the concerns and the logistical issues they're facing, and this was a great move on Washington State's part to let the NCAA know, hey, we don't need any interference. We don't need any heavy-handed interference.
Right.
We already have enough problems of our own. Leave us alone.
Yes.
And let us figure this out.
Correct. So, yeah. And if you're wondering what we're talking about, we've had, I think, 4 or 5, maybe 6 episodes on the Pac-12, specifically Washington State and Oregon State. And maybe if you're on here for the SEC information or for some other information and you're interested, take a look at our channel. We've done some deep dives in on this. It is really interesting, even if you're not a Pac-12 fan or a Washington State and Oregon State fan. It's interesting to see, I think, where things could be headed in all of college football. And we're going to get into some comments here of the SEC commissioner that, again, allude a little bit to kind of where things may be headed in a decade or 2036 or whatever it may be.
Yeah,
so,
I'm excited to hear what you got about.
All right, well, let's move. If you're good, let's move to.
Let's do it.
So Greg Sankey had an interview here this past week. Nothing real groundbreaking, but I do think it again laid the stage of kind of where we're at currently. And, the first topic here is more SEC focused. Yeah. The other two are really more just college football in general focused.
So Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC.
Correct. Greg Sankey, SEC commissioner. He had some comments. So he kind of took a step back. He became commissioner back in 2015. He kind of mentioned back at that time, it was the first time he was able to lead a meeting. He had been with the SEC, but lead a meeting with the presidents and chancellors there. And he set the stage and kind of picked out dates in the future at that time in 2015 in the future in terms of what could happen with conference realignment and things like that. They wanted to make sure they had some decision-making things on the table so they weren't blindsided here a little bit. So they, even back into 2015, they've been talking about this and they want to make sure that their SEC, this is, ready for what may be coming. In 2021 then, again, that wasn't the first time they've had these discussions. They had been planning that for 5, 6, 7 years, obviously prior to 2021. And he mentioned the 2021 decision was a forward-looking and well-informed decision. So it's something they clearly have been talking about, unlike maybe what has happened since then in the last, what do you want to say, year-ish?
More reactionary.
Very reactionary. Yep. I mean, this was very well planned out, very well focused on what they wanted to do. And again, he was focused on a 16-team conference, and in his mind, they have the best geography. A little bit of flavor there to some things that we have been talking about with Washington State and Oregon State in terms of regionality and just, geography. Again, very focused from the SEC side on being in a certain geographic area.
Yeah, I mean,
that's important.
That southeastern corner of the country is where, 80% of Division I recruits, the talent comes from there. It's just amazing, and their whole footprint is right over that area.
Right,
so for sure, yeah.
So he again talked about the strength of adding Texas and Oklahoma as very strategic. He said, the SEC at this point of all this craziness that's been occurring, they've been able to sit back and watch, and they had already made their decision. They were very comfortable with where things were at and where they're at as a conference. And again, they deem themselves to be the highest level conference that there is. So they were, took those steps early on, so they didn't get into kind of some of this craziness that certainly the Pac-12 is in, and maybe a little bit, you alluded to the ACC last year and where maybe they may be headed. They're feeling very, very comfortable with where they're at. So the second thing that they brought up, and these last two items are going to be more just college football in general, not SEC specific. Just was interesting to hear from a commissioner his take on some of these items. So the first item was the college football playoffs and the meetings and the future of those and what are they focusing on with this. And he was very clear they have two main focuses. Focus number one is on the 12-team expansion and how that's going to play out. That is their number one priority. That's where most of their discussions are. And item number two is to find a new executive director of the CFP. He didn't give percentages, but it sounded to me like 90% of what they're doing right now, very high level, are those two items. He said they're both both of those items are very time consuming, take a lot of energy, take a lot of focus. Clearly they would. There's some major changes going on there. He then mentioned the media and the partnership they have with ESPN. He said it's a great partnership, but he also said we need to look at other avenues and other ways when we expand to 12 teams. What's that going to look like? And he also mentioned what's going to happen with bowls after 2025. They're looking at that scheduling. They're looking at all of that. So just, again, that priority number one being a 12-team playoff, there's just so many moving parts. That's clearly where they're focused. He did quickly bring up the talk about the Pac-12 has been very minimal. He mentioned the Washington State AD did speak to everyone. I think he mentioned he wasn't there, but at this point, this is not a central thing for the CFP at this point. Right. It's just not something they're spending time on. Yep. They have other priorities to be focused on. And then the third item he brought up, and this is some things that we've talked about in the past as well, just litigation with collegiate athletics in total. Again, this is not football. This is not SEC. This is all collegiate athletics in all conferences. The first one he brought up was the class certification hearing on NIL and what does that going to mean? How are they moving forward with all of that? So that's obviously huge for everyone. Yep. The other one is just employment issues. He didn't get into a ton of detail in terms of what that meant, but he said there's a lot of stuff happening right now with employment issues. He brought up the HBCU leaders, and he really was kind of focused on really the mid or lower D1 and really the 2 and 3, like the effects some of this could really have on those programs. Yeah. We always get so focused on these top teams, this SEC and the Big 10 and the Big 12, and we're focused on this top, whatever it is, 40 schools or whatever the schools may be, 50 schools. But this type of stuff is affecting colleges over the entire country in Division II and Division III. And you've got to understand these the SEC, and they're all in this together. Right, so these litigation issues are affecting everyone, sure. and he really kind of focused on Division II and Division III, and where some of this litigation might play out with some of them. It seemed somewhat concerned, quite frankly. So, I don't know if you have any comments on any of that stuff. I know we want to get to a comment from a viewer then too.
Yeah, I'll make a couple quick comments.
Yeah.
So obviously he's one of the most powerful commissioners in college football.
Yes.
One of the top 2 conferences, and a lot of the best teams in the country are in his conference. A lot of the most valuable brands, especially now with them bringing in Texas and Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. I think all of those are great points, and he's incredibly smart, and he brings a lot of value to the conversation. Now, I will say, part of the brand of the SEC, which as the commissioner, it's his thing to advocate the brand of the SEC.
For sure.
Their mantra is it just means more in the SEC, mm-hmm. which is kind of a like we're better than everybody else kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I can see some of those undertones in what he's saying. I mean, they're kind of he's kind of taking a little bit of a holier than thou approach as far as we're not going to get wrapped up in being reactionary to conference expansion. They made the move to get Oklahoma and Texas,
right?
And which was a great move,
mm-hmm.
And that caused a lot of the dominoes and the reactions. Mm-hmm. So it is what it is. And then as far as he makes great points, all of these teams are programs and stuff are connected. We talked in the Pac-12 about this being a federal issue, not a state issue.
Yes.
Going forward, we think that's kind of where it's going to go,
right?
Because there's so many connections across state lines. Mm-hmm. This is commerce. And so a small school out in New Mexico could have an effect on what happens with schools like Alabama and Florida. If they were to lose litigation, or if their players were to unionize, whatever, that could affect these other teams. Now, I will say there is this trend, and I've seen it with Nick Saban before, and some of the powerful coaches, to the little bit of crocodile tears of what are these poor little schools going to do?
Right.
Whenever they want the powerful people want a certain thing, and they'll use the example because they know no one's going to be sympathetic towards Alabama, and Florida, and Georgia, whatever. So sometimes they use those small schools as what's going to happen to poor little Sister Mary of the Poor school?
Yes, right.
So anyways, but all great points. I'm really glad you brought these up because I do think they're great points. It's last thing I'll touch on, you said about the executive director of the College Football Playoff Committee.
Yes.
That is a potential huge position going forward.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of lines of thinking that the next governance structure for college football, instead of being under the NCAA umbrella, that they might kind of shift to being under that conference playoff umbrella. So whoever ends up being the next director, executive director, whatever they call it for that, might be the de facto commissioner of an overall college football playoff and all of these power conferences, power teams. So it's a huge move going forward.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get into one other thing here. We had a couple comments, and it gets into a little bit what we're talking about here with the SEC commissioner. Specifically, we had a fewer comments from our last episode regarding the new playoff format. There seems to be some confusion here in terms of who could get in and who might get in, and maybe some subpar teams, so to speak, being able to get into the playoff for some reason. Can you just go over for our viewers what this new college football playoff is going to look like?
So I think there's been a little misconception because we had the Power 5 for so long.
Yeah.
And the intention, so they're moving from a 14 playoff to a 12-team playoff. And there was this kind of a misconception that meant that the Power 5 are each going to get an automatic bid, and then one group of 5 team. But the way it's actually structured right now, this could change, but right now for these next 2 years of the expanded playoff, 12-team playoff, it's the top 6 conference champions. So that could be in the rankings, in their playoff rankings.
Right.
So that could be that you have 4 of the power conference champions plus 2 group of 5 champions. You could see all kinds of different scenarios. If like you mentioned earlier, we have the PAC12 for the next year or two. If Washington State or Oregon State was to win their 2-team conference, under the current rules, now they could change it, but under the current rules, how they're worded, one of those teams could very well be getting an automatic berth into the playoffs. The way if they're in the top 6 of conference champions. Now,
and on that point, it's my understanding that in order to change that, it would have to be a unanimous vote. Is that accurate?
Everything I've read, now I have not seen the long form contracts,
Sure, yeah.
But everything I've read, and there was specific we had on maybe last episode or the episode before, we had a statement from. Was it the AAC commissioner, maybe?
Yes, I believe it was the AAC.
Yeah, basically stating that, and he was the one who didn't want to make any changes.
Correct. He said, "We're good. I will not vote for that."
Yes. Yep. And he said on record. Now, so we have to take his word for it. But he went on record to say, and they're not allowed to change anything unless it's unanimous. So I'm not agreeing.
Yes.
So even with one conference saying no, we don't want to do this. So that's huge going forward. I can see why the major conferences would want to change that. Because they want to maximize. The SEC commissioner, he wants to maximize. He wants 6 teams in.
Yes.
Big Ten probably wants 5 to 6 teams in.
Yeah.
For me, at least these next 2 years, and we focus on the Big Ten and the Mountain West. I really think that this is a great opportunity. I wish it was starting this year.
Yeah.
But let's just kind of forward this season into next year. We would be in a position right now where Air Force, Wyoming, Fresno, Boise. They're basically would be playing to potentially get a playoff spot.
Oh, yeah.
Not just a New Year's Six. Right now, this year, they have a chance of a New Year's Six Bowl.
Right.
Probably not to get in the playoffs.
Right.
There's really not a feasible scenario. But next year, going forward, they definitely could be in a position. So I think for a conference like the Mountain West, I think this is a huge game changer for them. Just opens up the field. And with these programs like Air Force, Wyoming, Fresno, it's just a great opportunity for them to fight for, especially with the Pac-12 going away, possibly 1, even 2 spots.
Yes.
If they were to have 2,
yes,
that potentially could get in, or even Mountain West could potentially get 1, and if a Tulane or something from another smaller conference. So huge opportunity for the Mountain West going forward. Huge changes. Go to the 12-team playoff. It just expands your entire pool. Even as a Big Ten fan, I know we're probably going to get 4 or 5 teams every year.
Yeah.
But the reason I'm excited is for those smaller conferences.
Yes.
It gives them more of an open door. And if you did have a scenario, the particular question we got is if all the good teams left the ACC.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, Pitt was the champion. They were just a bad team. So I'm not even sure if they were ranked. They might have been ranked like 25th or unranked, and they were the ACC champion. I could see a scenario where that team would be left out, and maybe an Air Force or a Fresno or a Boise for Mountain West could get a spot over them. So
right. Well, and you mentioned the AAC commissioner not voting for that. I don't think any group of five.
No, why would you? Yeah,
we don't have facts to back that up.
Right.
But why would any group of five want to vote to change that for the next 2 years? It gives them an in to a potential 300 or whatever the number is going to be for that conference. Just one for them is huge. I mean, so you mentioned AAC because it was publicly, he made a public statement about it. But I wouldn't see any group of five commissioner saying that, we can change this so that we don't get into this. Of course they want to get into it.
Exactly. And it is important to, when we talked about this in our video, to reiterate that this is only for these next 2 years.
Yes.
After that, all bets are off, and the SEC commissioner, he's already laying his chips down how his vision is.
Yeah.
And the Big Ten commissioner, I'm sure, will have a say. Yeah. But for these next 2 years, it is a great opportunity for these group of five teams and to get somebody in. And it's definitely not a case of the Power Five getting an automatic berth. It could be 4 of the Power Five get a berth and 2 other champions. So we just want to clear that up.
Yep.
And I'm excited. I wish we had the. Can you imagine right now with a season the Mountain West is having?
Yeah.
If basically Wyoming was going to play Air Force for a potential chance at it'd be in the college football playoff, and we did just see a projection this week. I think it was On3's projection.
Yes,
maybe,
it was. I think you're right.
That had Air Force. If there was a 12-team playoff, had Air Force in there as the 12th seed, so which is awesome. Super exciting.
You sent me that. It was pretty cool to see. So, hey, we appreciate you tuning in again. If you have comments, again, let us know your thoughts. We look to do at least one expansion update a week. If we can get 2, we'll do 2, but at least 1 a week. And with that, we thank you for the likes. We thank you for the comments. And, of course, we like you for the subscribers. And we'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.